you're watching this, there's a good chance you are flirting with Podfade. You start off strong, bought the mic, picked the cover art, you even recorded a handful of episodes, maybe even a full season or a few. Then life starts lifing, energy fades, and we are somewhere between I'm on a break and do I even know if this show is still alive? I want to talk to you before you quietly walk away from your podcast, because the reality is most people do. My name is Talib Jasir. Since 2015, I've been coaching and teaching creators as a dual certified life coach. And since 2017, I've worked with podcasters as the founder of Afros and Audio, an independent podcast festival that ran for 7 years. I've watched shows launch, stall, pivot, and come back stronger. I know the patterns, and I know what usually keeps a creator going when everything else in life is pulling them away from the mic. Across all of those creators, one thing keeps showing up. Podfade is everywhere. It rarely means you are not capable. It usually means you need a different structure and a different set of expectations. And that is what we're going to build in this masterclass. Industry data still shows that a huge chunk of podcasts never make it past the first handful of episodes. One 2025 analysis found that while there are more than 5.2 million podcasts worldwide, a large percentage spin out in the first 10 episodes, even as the average lifespan has recently increased by about 22%. If you are stuck, you're not an outlier. You're actually the norm. But here's the thing. You are not just a podcaster. You're a creator, storyteller, interviewer, speaker, and an effective communicator. And for a lot of you, you are one of the few people in your world who is even trying to create, build, or publish something like this. So before you podfade, I want you to try some things. And this class will provide a way forward for all creators and any podcaster considering hanging up their mic and headphones. But I'll be honest, this class is especially for Black, Brown, disabled, women, queer, neurodivergent, and otherwise underrepresented creators. I'm speaking directly to you, to us, because the data is very clear about who gets heard and who does not. We will walk through 3 big things: why your show matters more than you think, how to reset your expectations and structure seasons so you don't burn out, 3, real creative engagement and monetization ideas you can try before you decide to end or evolve your show. I'm going to keep this 100% honest and practical because I want this masterclass to be the one people recommend anytime someone says, I'm thinking about quitting my podcast. So let's start with why your voice fading out is not a small thing. Who actually holds the mic? Right now, most of the people at the top of podcasting still look the same. A new study from USC Annenberg looked at the top 100 podcasts of 2024 and found that about 77% of hosts are white and around 64% are men. Women of color made up only around 7% of hosts in these top shows. That means when you scroll through the biggest, most promoted shows, we keep hearing from the same demographic over and over. Now compare that to who is listening. Edison Research 2024 Podcast Consumer Report shows that about 48% of Black Americans and 43% of Latino Americans are monthly podcast listeners, and around 45% of women in the U.S. are listening monthly too. Again, according to Edison Research. So the audience is diverse. The hosts, especially at the top, aren't. If you're Black, Brown, disabled, a woman, queer, or sitting at the intersection of any of that, you are listening to a medium that doesn't fully reflect you yet, even though your community is showing up as listeners. That is why your show matters. I don't mean you have to keep grinding out episodes forever. Shows have seasons, projects evolve, you grow. All of that is natural. Nothing needs to run eternally to have value. What I am saying is this: when you fade without a plan, you are not just disappearing from your feed, you are subtracting one more rare voice from a space that still doesn't have enough of us. That's why I want to give you a different way to think about Podfade. Reframing Podfade and thinking like you have a portfolio. Since my tenure in the podcast industry and as a fellow creator, host, and producer, I've heard Podfade get framed like a character issue. You must not have wanted it bad enough. Weren't you committed? It must not have worked out the way you hoped. Those are all lazy takes. What I've learned from creators just like you and me is that most podfading is a systems problem, a life happening problem, and even an expectations problem. So let's get the lie about it being a moral failing out of the way. The fact is, most of us treat our podcast like it has to be the one show we carry on our back forever. But podcasting lives in the same creative family as writing, music, acting, and visual art. Writers typically don't write one book. Musicians don't only release one album. And actors don't play one role and go home. So here's the reframe. You are not a failed podcaster. You're a creator with a growing portfolio. Your podcast is one body of work inside that portfolio. It might deserve another season. It might need to evolve. It might even be complete as it is. You can also create another show later or build an entire network of your own projects over time. When you start thinking in terms of your body of work, instead of this one podcast must carry everything forever, you'll get your power back. I'm asking that you start to treat your podcast the same way you would treat a book, a film, or a collection of essays, with intention, a real ending, and clear next steps. So before you podfade, the goal is to decide, am I going to renew this show with a better plan, reshape, or retire it on purpose and move that energy somewhere else? To answer that, you first need to reset your expectations around success. So it's time to define measurable levels of success for your show. One reason so many creators burn out is invisible comparison. We find ourselves side by side in our heads with celebrity shows signed to 8-figure deals and studios with teams of editors, researchers, and social media staff. No wonder we feel tired. Let's build a different scoreboard. I want you to think of success in 4 levels for each season of your show. Level 1 is completion. Completion success means you did the season you promised yourself. If you said I'm doing 8 episodes and you published 8 episodes, that counts. It's a win. A full season of thoughtful work is a real thing, even if your numbers are small. Level 2 is connection. Connection success is when the show actually connects with your ideal audience. That could be a listener DMing you saying, this podcast has helped me a lot. 5 people who email you after a particular episode. A client who references something you said in your show when they hire you. And here's a big one. If people are talking back to you, even quietly, your show is doing something. Level 3 is growth. Growth success does not need to be explosive. It just needs to be intentional and trackable. That might be going from 40 downloads an episode to 80, or from 2 email subscribers a month to 10, or 3 comments per episode to 15. Pick growth that fits your current life and time, and write it down at the beginning of your season so your brain isn't chasing someone else's numbers. Level 4 is revenue. Revenue success is any way your show helps money move in a healthy direction. That could be a small local sponsor paying a few $100s, a coaching or consulting client who found you through your podcast, a workshop you sell to your existing listeners, or a workshop based on a theme of your podcast or an episode that you can sell to your existing listeners, or a paid cohort that grows directly from the show. And we'll talk more about monetization in a bit. For now, here's the practical step. Before you podfade, pick a real endpoint for your current season. For example, I'm going to complete 6 more episodes, or I'm going to close this theme out with 4 focused episodes. Then define a simple goal at each of those levels: completion, connection, growth, and revenue. Give yourself permission to go all in on that season. And at the end, review honestly and decide the show's future from that place, not from a place of guilt or exhaustion. The reality is, our show lives in a bigger industry. So let's zoom out for a moment with a different data point. A 2025 article from Command Your Brand pulled together several industry reports and found that there are now over 5.2 million podcasts worldwide, up from 4.7 million in 2024. And around 120,000 new podcasts launched in just the first half of 2025. Not surprisingly, the majority of those are from small creators, entrepreneurs, and niche brands, just like you and me. So people are still starting shows. A lot of them. That same piece notes that the average lifespan of new podcasts has increased in 2025. That means more creators are coming in with a plan. They're more strategic, and they're treating podcasting as a long game instead of an experiment or a hobby. So we're not trying to build in a dead space. The medium is still very much alive. It's just matured and evolved, which means that we have to build with a bit more structure than the early days. Now let's get into what you can actually try before you decide to fade out. All right, here's some creative experiments to try before you quit. Sometimes podfade is boredom in disguise. You're tired of your format, tired of the schedule, even tired of hearing your own voice in the same way. So let's talk about some creative experiments you can run inside your existing show. Experiment 1. A mini-series inside your feed. Pick one narrow theme and create a 3 or 4 episode arc around it. Make that your next micro season. For example, 4 conversations with disabled creatives about the real cost of visibility. 3 solo episodes about what actually changed after I started my podcast. 4 client case studies where I pull back the curtain on what we did and why. Label them clearly in your title so listeners feel the arc with you. Experiment 2. A season debrief episode. Most podcasters never do this. Sit down and record an honest review of your season. What worked? What drained you? What surprised you? What listeners responded to the most? What you'll never, ever do again. This gives you closure, gives you audience context, and often sparks your next idea. Experiment 3. Listener-led episodes. You don't have to guess what people want you to talk about. Set up a free tool like SpeakPipe or a simple voice note intake form. Ask listeners for questions or even stories, and build an episode around 3 or 4 of those. You can even structure a recurring format like Listeners Question Week or Office Hours. Experiment 4. Low-pressure episodes. Create one format you can record on the phone when you're low energy. That could be a short reflection, a here's what I'm noticing in my corner of the world this week, or a quick answer to one question you keep getting. Keep these under 10 minutes. Think of them as bridge episodes that keep your feed alive without burnout. And experiment 5, collaboration without overcomplication. Instead of a full-blown new show, do a feed spot with another indie creator. You'll place one of their best episodes in your feed with a short intro, and they'll do the same with one of yours. You both get fresh energy and new listeners with minimal effort. Before you end your show completely, pick at least one of these, maybe even 2, and try it for one small run. Then, see how you feel afterwards. Engagement ideas that help you feel like the creative powerhouse you are. Most advice about promoting your podcast sounds like post more clips and pray. That might help, but for a lot of you, the path to staying motivated lives closer to the ground. So here's some engagement ideas that can pull you out of isolation and make the show and you as a creator feel alive again. Engagement idea 1, neighborhood canvassing. Head to Canva or whatever you use and print a simple one-page flyer or postcard with your cover art, a QR code that goes straight to your show, and one line that tells people what they get when they listen. Walk into any small business or organization that aligns with your topic. If you host a parenting show, go into local children's boutiques, libraries, schools, and community centers. If you host a creator podcast, walk into co-working spaces, studios, and independent bookstores. Introduce yourself, leave a few postcards behind, and offer to shout them out in an episode as a thank you. This is also how you start building relationships with local partners and sponsors. Engagement idea 2, small listening clubs. Pick one episode each month and invite your audience to a live 30-minute conversation on Zoom or another platform. No heavy presentation, just you, whoever shows up, and the episode as a jumping off point. You may get story ideas, listener feedback, and most importantly, real faces attached to the numbers in your dashboard. Remember, this could be a 30-minute to an hour-long listening club directly with your audience. Engagement idea 3, micro challenges. For one season, build a simple challenge into your show. Things like reply to this episode with one sentence about how it resonated with you. You could ask them to share this episode with one person and let them know why you chose them and this episode for them to listen to. You can ask, send me a voice note with your favorite quote, and I'll include some of them in my next episode. By doing even one of these, you're training your audience to engage as participants, not just background listeners. Engagement idea 4, ask your guests to intentionally engage and share the podcast episode they were on. When you do have guests, give them at least one clear request. For example, pick one clip you like from this episode and post it with one sentence about why you agreed to come on the podcast. That can feel more genuine than a generic graphic or clip and a request to share this everywhere when they can. And the end result is it expands both of your reach. You don't need to do all of these, but before you Podfade, I ask that you choose at least one of these engagement experiments and give it a real try. Finding help so you don't burn out as a siloed creator. One thing that often drives Podfade is trying to do everything yourself throughout the span of your podcast. Recording, editing, show notes, social clips, promotion. It's a lot. But the good news is there are more options to bring in help at different price points. For instance, for editing and post-production, there are budget-friendly software tools like Audacity and other free editors that can still make your audio sound more professional. There's dedicated podcast editing services that handle mixing, cleanup, and even basic show notes for you. And several companies now offer flat-rate monthly packages for indie podcasters. There are even marketplaces where you can hire freelance editors. And a 2025 guide from Market Hire breaks down the pros and cons of hiring a freelance editor, an agency, or using a marketplace, so you can pick what fits your budget and stage. You don't have to jump straight to a full production company. Sometimes hiring an editor for 2 episodes a month is enough to keep you going. For hosting and distribution, there are platforms that now bake in monetization and discovery tools. Recent roundups of hosting platforms highlight options that offer built-in ad marketplaces, crowdfunding, and integrations with Apple Podcast subscriptions and Patreon. But do your own research before you switch, and know that your original choice doesn't have to be permanent. If your current host is blocking you from growth, that's a fixable problem. The point is, before you Podfade, at least consider whether you're stuck because the work is too heavy for one person. If you can afford even a little help, strategic outsourcing might keep the show alive without sacrificing your health or your budget. Monetization options that can actually work for you. Now let's talk about money. A lot of creators, and I do mean a lot, stop their shows because they are tired of pouring energy into something that never seems to pay off. We don't need millions. Sometimes we just want proof that the effort we put into our podcast can support at least some aspect of its production. The good news is the monetization world has expanded a lot in the last couple of years. Recent overviews of podcast monetization tools point out platforms like Libsyn, Red Circle, Captivate, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify subscriptions, and even open access tools like Supercast and others that help with things like dynamic ads, premium feeds, and subscriber-only episodes. On the fan support side, Patreon recently passed $10 billion paid out to creators and has been rolling out upgraded podcast-specific features, including better RSS support and tools for multi-show management. So the infrastructure exists. The question is how you want to use it. Here are some practical monetization paths you can consider before you phase out your show. Path 1. Local partners and sponsorships. You don't need massive numbers for this. If your show serves a clear audience, you can walk into a local business or organization that's aligned and say, I host a podcast for Describe Your Audience. I would like to feature your business in a short ad read for the next 3 episodes and send my listeners your way. Would you be open to testing that at whatever your rate is so we can see how it goes? You won't convert all of the businesses that you go into as paid sponsors or partners, but at least you're on their radar and they may be connected to the next business that does buy in or listen to a future episode to see how your ads are going. Another added incentive for some of these partners is you pre-recording the ad and playing it for them. That way they can hear in real time the level of effort you're making and the opportunity that you're presenting for them. Now you can bundle that with the canvassing we talked about earlier, so it feels like a partnership and not begging, which is how most of us feel about asking for money. Path 2, service-aligned offers. If you're a coach, consultant, writer, strategist, or any kind of service provider, your show can be a warm lead to paid work. You can offer a paid workshop that goes deeper on a topic that resonates with your audience. Create a simple digital guide that expands on a strong episode series. You can also invite listeners who are ready for more to join a cohort or book a strategy session. The key is to make an offer that genuinely connects to what you talk about on the show, instead of just slapping on a random product. Path 3, premium content for your inner circle. Using tools like Apple and Spotify subscriptions, Supercast, Patreon, or member features in your host platform, you can create a simple paid tier. That can include extended versions of episodes, behind-the-scenes process breakdowns, Q&A calls or office hours, and even access to resources or templates that you use. You don't have to build a complicated membership when you can start with one thing your most engaged listeners keep asking for. Path 4, grants and partnerships. There's also a growing world of grants, residencies, and institutional partnerships for storytellers, journalists, and cultural projects. Your show can serve as a portfolio that proves your concept. If your podcast sits at the intersection of culture, community, education, and even art, you can research grants in those areas and position your next season as a project that uses those funds. The point here is not to overwhelm you with options. It's to remind you that you have more paths than get 50,000 downloads and hope one day a big brand notices. Before you Podfade, pick one monetization experiment for your next season. Treat it like research and see what happens. Where to find help and resources. I made a promise to myself and to any of you who discovered and watched this masterclass, that this wouldn't just be empty ideas floating in the air, but practical and pragmatic strategies that you can use. But this masterclass won't be all that it will take. So along with this, I recommend you build a small personal resource stack in 3 areas. 1, places to find audio professionals and editors, or a wish list of software and hardware that you can graduate to as a completion goal reward. Tools and platforms that simplify your process. You want to do some research here and speak with peers actively using these platforms and tools. Learning and support spaces that speak to you as a creator. For editors and production help, start a short list of 1 or 2 podcast-specific editing services you vetted or heard about. 1 or 2 freelancers whose work you have heard about and trust. And a realistic price range for each based on your budget. For platforms, choose 1 host and 1 or 2 monetization tools to explore further. Look at things like Podbean's built-in monetization, Libsyn or Red Circle's ad tools, or Supercast and Patreon for premium feeds, and pick what you might grow into instead of what impresses you on paper. For learning and support, you can use reports like Edison Research's Podcast Consumer and studies like the recent USC Annenberg's Podcast Inequality Report as your reality check. All of these things remind us that our listeners are diverse. It's the host and the industry that's still catching up, which means for you that you're building in a real context, not a vacuum. Now let's bring this home with the checklist of what to try before you podfade. If you're still here, I'm speaking to you, the you that's thought about ending your podcast. And from this point forward, I want you to move from vague guilt to clear decisions. Here's your before you podfade checklist. 1, name the true end of your current season of podcasts. Decide how many more episodes you will complete and make it specific. 2, define success for this season of your podcast at 4 levels: completion, connection, growth, and revenue. Write those goals down. 3, choose at least 1 creative experiment, a mini-series, debrief episode, listener questions, low-pressure episode, or a feed swap. 4, choose at least 1 engagement experiment, neighborhood canvassing, listening club, micro challenge, or better guest collaboration. 5, decide if you need help. Look honestly at your time, energy, and life. Would hiring or bartering with an editor, even twice a month, change how you feel about continuing? 6, pick 1 monetization avenue to test. Local partners or sponsors, service-aligned offers, premium content, or a grant strategy. 7, schedule a review date. Put a date on your calendar to sit down after the season ends. Look at the data, your energy, and the feedback, and make an intentional choice from here. When you do this, your podcast is no longer something you fell off of. It becomes a project in your creative portfolio with a clear arc. Your voice, effort, and podcast deserves that kind of respect. Here's the call to action. I want this masterclass to be the moment where you shift from "I'm tired and guilty" to "I'm a creator making deliberate choices about my work." If this helps you, I want you to do 3 things. First, tell me in the comments which step on the checklist you needed the most. Is it expectations, creative experiments, help with production, or monetization? Second, check the description for the resource links I mentioned. I will include places to find editors and producers, articles on monetization platforms, and reports that show the real state of podcasting right now. I will also link to my upcoming 2026 cohorts and future skill plate courses and resources. So if you want structured support and strategy from someone who has worked with creators like you for years, you can simply tap in and work with me directly. Third, make a promise to yourself about the season of your show. Write it down, say it out loud, give it a real chance before you decide to let it go. Because the medium already has plenty of the same voices. The people who listen to your show are waiting for what only you can say. So before you podfade, try this. I'm Talib Jasir, founder and CEO of Afros in Audio, Vanguard Podcast Network, and Down the Road Media. Thank you for hanging out with me and watching this masterclass. And I'll see you in your next season or the next podcast you create in your creative portfolio. You can find me on all social media platforms at Talib Jasir or Afros in Audio. You can also find my creative work or learn more about my professional experience at talibjasir.com. And last but not least, head over to afrosinaudio.com to learn more about what Afros in Audio is up to in 2026 and beyond. Thanks for watching.